Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. This is another episode of the Jason's Take On podcast series. It's myself, Jason Noble in London, and my colleague, partner, Jason Whitehead over in the US. Welcome to this episode. First of all, we hope everyone's keeping safe and okay in this very strange and difficult time for everybody. We hope everyone's all right. Most of the world's still in lockdown. We've had some great conversations with other guests that are coming up soon. And other people in the customer success industry who are working through these challenges that they're seeing now. So we do hope everyone's okay. As normal, this is our podcast episode for the month. This month, we're going to be talking about revenue ownership and how commercial is your customer success organization. So Jason and I talking about some really interesting ideas around the commercial side of customer success and what that means to organizations. As normal, we have a Be Bold challenge question we'd like you to think about. That we'll talk about at the beginning and then come back to at the end. But really give us your thoughts about this and then come back with any feedback that you've got on our LinkedIn group, the Jason's Take On, and our Twitter page as well. We'd love your feedback to hear what you guys are saying. For intro for myself, so I'm Jason Noble, based here in London, currently as the VP of Global Customer Success for Vinly, a Dallas-based technology startup in the world of connected cars. I am leading and building the customer success organization there, working very closely with our customers. Very challenging times now that our customers as well are all in lockdown, but working really close with them. Jace, do you want to give a quick intro to yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Jason Whitehead here, based in the Washington, D.C. area. I've been working in customer success and user adoption for over 20 years now, doing training, consulting, setting up programs, coaching people, doing all sorts of great stuff, and just love doing this podcast series. So thank you so much for joining us.
I think that's the really cool thing. I mean, I think we're both just in such great positions that this is a fun podcast to do for us, isn't it? I mean, we don't talk about that enough. And we just enjoy doing this, having the same kind of passion. And we have our own debates and challenges that we work through each other, but we really enjoy doing this. And we hope our listeners get the same thing out of this. So the topic today, how commercial is your customer success organization? And our Be Bold challenge question is, what steps can you take now to define and implement a commercial customer success program in your organization? So have a think about that as we go through the podcast. As I said, we'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts. So what steps can you take right now to define and implement a commercial customer success program in your organization?
And it's such an interesting question and topic that I think the answer we would have gotten 2 months ago will be very different than what we get to now today. So I think it's very timely. But Jason, why don't you kick us off? We talk about a commercial customer success program. What do we actually mean by commercial?
I think it's a really interesting question. Until we kind of came together to think about this podcast, what does the word commercial really mean? And a strict dictionary definition is about businesses and organizations that are selling for a profit. So you're selling goods, services to make a profit. So that is what commercial means. And I think that or commerce even, I think that still applies to the majority of what organizations in customer success are doing. We're trying to drive the commercial success of our customers. We're trying to enable them to be commercially successful, make profits, increase their revenues. And the same applies to us internally. We're also trying to increase the revenue, increase the commercial footprint with our organizations. And I think there really has to be a large component of commercial and revenue ownership within customer success. And I think this is something that I've seen in many organizations that I've been with struggle with this. I think historically, sales have absolutely owned revenue ownership, and in many organizations they still do. And a lot of businesses struggle with, well, what does CS own? Does CS have commercial targets? Do they have sales type targets? So you really need to reconsider what commercial means within your organization and where the ownership sits of revenue. And it isn't just new business revenue, it's revenue from renewals, it's revenue from upsells, it's revenue from cross sells, revenue from additional value that's being driven with your customers. So you've really got to think about that whole area of revenue. What does revenue actually mean in your business? Where does it come into? I think ultimately, if you look at the valuation of many businesses today, it is ultimately based on multiples of revenue, multiples of profit. And that, again, it all comes down to the commercial side of a business. So if you're trying to value a business, you have to have that commercial understanding. And I think that the really interesting thing is that in the subscription or SaaS world, we've got very new business models. This isn't just about a upfront sale and forget about it. It's not about just new customers and new sales and that focus only being on existing customers, which organizations have traditionally done, which is why you see a lot of organizations still struggling with where revenue ownership sits and why many still think it sits within sales. And that's where the sales focus is. I think one really interesting thing we're seeing now during the crisis that we're having with COVID-19, there are very sadly a lot of customer success organizations and professionals that we know of, that we hear about, that are either being furloughed or actually being made redundant as a part of changes in the organizations. But you don't see the same thing within sales organizations, or not as apparent. So it's a really interesting dilemma that's going on there. So I think the biggest thing that we've got to still do, which comes back to what customer success is and why it needs to be commercial, is how do you retain your existing customers? How do you drive commercial value for your customers and from your customers? And how do we keep and grow them? And that's something that I don't think a lot of businesses are really still putting the focus on. I think we're beginning to see that shift. But I really think that only by being commercial can your customer success organization really take ownership around that. Which I think, Jason, it leads me on to kind of the next question that I'll throw back to you.
Okay.
And kind of overlaps with a bit of what I've talked about there.
Sure does.
Why do you think customer success in your customer success program needs to be commercial? What are the big reasons that it's so important now?
I think you've hit on a lot of them, but I'll try and add a few more. And I definitely agree with the idea. No, it's all. When you look at sales folks there, and as you say, the sales department is usually one of the last to get cut or impacted. They may get rid of some of the people who are not hitting their numbers quite as much as others. But it's because of that revenue mentality and that revenue connection in the minds of others. And I think if customer success needs to remember that this all started because there was a churn problem. Most CS programs started as churn mitigation. We've just seen that the industry evolved from there, and it was meant to solve a financial issue. So since then, we've seen a lot of bigger issues here. People are realizing that so much revenue comes from the existing customers and not just the initial sales, and your lower cost to serve an existing customer, and that someone's got to be responsible for these folks. And a lot of organizations still have account managers that really are processing transactions and seeing where they need to go, and maybe dealing with some contractual issues, but they're not typically as close to the customer as the CS team is. They don't really know the customer's needs as much. They don't have the relationships there that CS does or should have to go and actually help drive success and drive expansion, drive renewals. And I think you hit the nail on the head too. Like a lot of CS folks that I know are uncomfortable with a revenue generating mentality. They're very focused on how do I get customers to be successful, to have a nice net promoter score, all these other metrics that they work towards, and they forget that the ultimate goal here is to raise revenue for your organization by making your customers more successful. And I think if a CS team understands the commercial side better and understands their role in it, it will help everyone along the way. And I think, Jason, one of the things that we talked about and that you started to touch on here is what happens if your CS team doesn't have this commercial focus and also isn't perceived as having this commercial focus and isn't perceived as having this tie to revenue. A few things, your customers aren't really sure of what you're doing and why you exist. They don't really they don't understand or perceive the value that you can bring to them. So they need to understand this is how we make our customers successful. This is the revenue that our customers will give us because they're successful. Your internal teams certainly don't understand why you exist. And we hear that one all the time of sales doesn't quite get it. No one understands what I need to do. They're unwilling to actively engage with us during handovers and things like that, because they don't really see the time and value there per se. And I think, one big one here is it's really hard to convince leadership to continue to fund and grow your CS team if they're not actually generating revenue, especially now, especially in tough times. And it makes it really easy to cut your team. If you're an executive, and you're like, I have to make some tough choices, and they are tough choices. What's going to generate the most revenue for my organization? What's going to generate the most cost? And so many of these conversations have been, do we even operate CS as a profit center, or is it a cost center? And I think that conversation is still existing in a lot of places, and I think it needs to move on towards, of course, it's a revenue focus. It's got to be commercial. So, those are a few of my thoughts. And I think without that commercial focus, it's really easy for CS teams to focus on the wrong activities, and you get really distracted doing things that don't necessarily deliver the results that you and your customers need to grow, and to grow expansion sales and grow renewal sales. And I think that's really important that people stay focused on the right priorities. So those are just a couple of my thoughts. Let me turn this one over to you though. What do you think needs to happen for internal leadership, your CEO, your CRO, chief customer officer, to really see CS as a commercial entity? So if we agree that it's important for them to be it, does it take for others in the organization, especially leadership, to perceive them as such?
I think one thing you've got to do is look as to how as a business you're trying to position customer success, and how the business see it driving value. It's really got to be seen as a kind of an equal to the sales team. We're not there to get the new business. We're not there to generate the new leads. That's absolutely what sales teams do. That's what they are absolutely amazing at. But we've got to be seen there to be driving the revenue for a longer term relationships. And so I think it's the understanding, make sure that it's understood that the most revenue from our customers isn't going to come from the initial sale only. There's a customer lifetime that we've got to look at. We've got to think, what is the lifetime value that I'm trying to get from my customer, and who's got the responsibility of that? So I think you need to look at kind of changing terminology. We've got sales customer success, but it's commercial customer success. And you've really got to change what people are expecting those different organizations and different leaders within the business to bring in. And I think you do have to give your customer success team and the leader some commercial targets. And I think when that starts happening and we start driving value from our customers, and our customers get more value, they start renewing, we start seeing that increasing revenue coming from our existing customers. Sales absolutely feed the top of that renewal funnel. But what's happening is we've got our customer success teams helping to make sure that those renewals are completed. And it's so important to see that. So I think you need to think about splitting out kind of new biz and the rest of the revenue within the business. So don't talk about just the idea of renewals and expansions. I think what you've got to do is actually use terms like renewal sales or renewal opportunities, or expansion sales and expansion opportunities. So we're changing how we're positioning these. I think the word sales means a lot more to other people. So if we bring that tagline in and start talking about the idea of renewal sales, renewal opportunities, it gives it a lot more commercial meaning to it that I think resonates a lot more with your CEO, your finance director, your chief revenue officer, or your chief finance officer. I think it's important to kind of maybe reposition how you talk about renewals and expansions within your organization. And I think ultimately what you've got to do and help your leadership team understand is realize that everything that the customer success function and team is doing is about growing and managing the customer success funnel. So it isn't a new business sales funnel. This is the customer success sales funnel. How do I make sure that my customer coming in at the top of that funnel goes through all the right stage gates, the right milestones, and renews at the end of it? But the same with expansions, the same with cross sells, upsells. How do I make sure that they're growing as they're meant to and going through that funnel? And it's so important to think about that. And you've got to think about both the idea of renewal sales efforts and expansion sales efforts to get them transitioning through that funnel. I think one other key thing, and it can be a very touchy topic, is to look at how your compensation models work for both your sales team and your customer success team, to recognize their contributions to the customer sales funnel. So looking at the renewal sales and the expansion sales. So the sales team absolutely do have a part in it, but the customer success team do. And I think you've got to put in for both the right sort of weighting so that people are rewarded appropriately for their efforts and the work they're doing. So I think there's a lot of changes. There's changes, just to reiterate, in terminology, how you talk about it. There's changes in just positioning what customer success is about, who owns the different areas of revenue. And then talk about the idea of this customer sales funnel that is reliant on existing customers, not new biz. And I think that's a very different way of thinking. And then finally, it's looking at the different commission models across both. So some of these are big items. They're not things that can be fixed very quickly. In a lot of organizations where you've got history, it takes time to change these. But I think it's important that you as a CS leader, or even you as an exec, understand what we're trying to do with this and position that.
Yeah, and I love what you said about it's not renewals and expansions, it's renewal sales and expansion sales. And I love that, the customer success sales funnel, and really reminding people that this is what it's about. And I think that helps helps the CS team and leaders as well as, you know, the executives in the organization. And I think it'd be interesting internally with the CS team, how often are they having their customer success sales funnel reviews? You know,
Yep.
they do QBRs and they talk about that, but I never hear them talk about their customer success sales funnel.
Because that in turn, it's an internal sales funnel as well, isn't it? You almost want to talk to your internal leadership team, part of your own one-to-ones, your monthly reviews internally. You know, what are you doing about these customer sales funnels? And I think that's a
Right.
really key thing. So it's a new term. We'd really love kind of people's feedback on that as well. You know, how are you positioning that internally? Jason, let me throw the next question back to you based on that. Then how do you link customer outcomes? You know, if we're looking about driving outcomes and value for our customer, how do you link those with the commercial efforts and objectives of our sales and customer success team? So how do you bring the two together?
Yeah, so I'm excited about this question and this topic. I actually am working on a couple of visuals that hope to release on my blog soon and for future things as well. But I'd like to talk about this in the form of what we call a sort of a mutual success chain. And if you can take in vision your mind just a chain that's got, you know, several links all the way through. We're going to look at the very first link and really think of this first link or this initial loop, if you will, as sort of a loop of mutual success. And the seller and the buyer need to get value from this relationship, and they need to be able to talk about that right up front of how we get mutual value, even during the sales process. What does that look like? And so I've got this circular relationship, and on the left side, I think of the vendor, they make a sale. So it starts with a sale. And on the opposite side of that, you know, halfway around the loop, you've got the customer's business outcomes. What have they actually achieved as a result of this? So the idea is that you get a sale and then the customer gets their outcomes. And as a result of their outcomes, that can close the circle if they get the outcomes that they want. And if they're getting the value that they want, and the customer will give you references, they'll give you insights, they'll give you social proof and things like that, that can help lead to your next sale with a new customer as well. So this sort of helps, this feedback and insights that they're giving the vendor, this really helps the vendor evolve the product so that it meets the current customer's future needs, and it helps them with new sales. So effectively, it closes this loop of the circle. The customer gets the business outcomes that they want, the vendor gets both the sale that they want plus the feedback and references they need to win future sales. So everybody's happy and everybody's getting something. And then you say, so what happens next? I think you start to look, say, all right, so if the circle is closed, this becomes sort of the first link on a chain. The next loop or that next link really begins with that renewal sale or the expansion sale, either one in there. So we've had one loop of success, and then we have this connected loop of future success. And it continues again with a renewal or expansion sale on one side and the customer outcomes on the other. And, you know, if the customer continues to get their desired outcomes from this link, then they will continue through the next cycle and start another success loop, all linked together to form a success chain. So if you think of each renewal period or each expansion as a link, your goal is to have as long of a chain with as many links as you can. And you want to have these be as strong as you can. You want tight relationships. You want the customer to really perceive the value and the outcomes that they're getting. You know, look at things right now with the current crisis. Organizations are being forced to make really tough choices in their vendors. So if they don't see a lot of direct value and they don't perceive the value coming from you, they're still going to have to cut you. And so it's really important that the customer achieve the results and perceive what they're getting from you to get this chain going. So I think it's also important that internally to remember that the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And that's pretty hokey to say, but it's so true. You know, so the question that you and everyone in your organization needs to constantly ask is what I'm doing right now strengthening or weakening the success chain? You know, is it strengthening it for our customers? Is it in their best interest in ours? Is it going to continue to grow this chain all the way through? Or is it going to weaken this chain to the point that it breaks and the customer no longer renews, no longer expands? And I think getting every single person in your organization focused on that is a great way to get people to be a little bit more aligned of why are we doing this? You know, and I think another thing that I like about the success chain concept, while it may start, the very first loop on the success chain may start with sales and marketing, initiating this relationship with the customer. So maybe they kick it off, but everyone in the organization can break it. You know, if someone delivers bad experiences to the customer or doesn't work in the customer's interest, or the customer's not getting the outcomes they need, or product isn't building the tool that customers need based on their feedback, that's going to weaken your links. It's going to break your success chain. So it's important that while only a couple of departments may initiate this, anyone can break it. So everyone in your organization and in the customer side needs to be focused on what is the success chain for everyone. So just my thoughts on a success chain concept and how people can think about it a little bit differently and maybe explain it. And I encourage you to come back to my blog in a couple of weeks. We'll have more information out there that I think will explain this a little bit more. So that's my thought. Jason, using that, how does the CS team get the right balance of being just focused on sales and sort of viewed as an extension of the sales team, while also working to help customers drive adoption and achieve their business goals? How do they get that right?
Great question, that. And I think this is one of the challenges that we see in customer success is where does it sit within an organization? And I've seen, again, many organizations where it could sit within technology, it could sit within operations, or it could sit within sales and reporting into kind of a sales exec. So I think a lot of those bring their own challenges. And I think it is very difficult to get the balance right. And as much as I hate to say it, a lot of it depends on your organization, your customers. I love your idea about the success chain, Jason. I think it's a really cool idea that I know we're going to have another podcast about in the not too distant future. Mm-hmm. But it's a really, really clever idea. And I think if you look at that concept of a chain and all the different links together, so building on that, you need to recognize that once a sale's closed and done, there is another step, there is another link in that chain. And that next link is, how do I help the customer drive user adoption and achieve their business outcomes? And exactly like you said, one link goes to another, one part of the chain, and you have to follow it through. And if one is broken, the whole chain gets broken. So unless you are talking to your customers about adoption specifically and achieving their business outcomes, you're going to have big problems. So this is, and it's this point at which a lot of organizations struggle. And I think what you need to do as a CS team is really have a long-term view that you're focused on. Yes, you're focused on the renewal sale and the expansion sale, but that the critical path to achieving those helps the customers go through driving change, driving adoption, and using our products. And by doing all of that, it helps them ultimately to achieve the outcomes they want. You need to understand what their outcomes are. I think that's absolutely critical. There are still some organizations that are challenged to understand what the customers are trying to do, what ultimately what they want, not just they want to buy and use their product, but what the value and outcomes that the customers are looking for. So you do need to make sure that you understand those from a commercial level, but make sure you've got those different links then in place to understand how are you helping them drive change, how are you helping them drive adoption, how are you helping them use your product, and ultimately how does that then help them achieve the business outcomes that they're looking to do. So it's its own success chain that follows on. And again, without succeeding on each one of those, the ultimate goal of having the customer achieve their own outcomes doesn't work as successfully. And I think only as you see your customer close the loops for renewals, for success, are they going to continue to expand and grow those relationships with us. What we don't want from our customers is just to be a single relationship for one period of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. We want that relationship to continue. So we've got to keep visiting this idea of a success loop, the success chain, and keep revisiting what it means for them to be successful. We need our sales teams to also talk about the concept of a success chain from the beginning. I think it's really important. Make sure that you're selling to the customer, not just about features and functions and benefits, but how that everything we're doing is about working towards mutual success with them and for them and with us and for us. And that's really important to do. And I think having your sales team talk to your customer about outcomes and what does success looks like, it makes you understand it a lot better. You can articulate it and present it a lot better internally and play it back to your customer to demonstrate that they are or are not achieving it and what steps you might need to take to move back to the right course. I think with what you've got to do is you've also got to help the customer identify what success means. And a lot of them may need some guidance and direction to understand what success actually means to them. A lot of them are going through kind of change processes themselves internally as businesses. And I think it's important to help them understand that change is needed to help drive success and help drive adoption as part of this. And I think that is really important, that you've got to be part of that change for your customer. And often it's not a simple journey. It can be quite bumpy throughout that journey to achieve that change. And you also, I think, critically, and you talked about this earlier, Jason, is that you want the feedback from your customer. You want to help grow and evolve our product. We want to provide references from our customers. We want the social proof that we're driving value and creating success from them that can then help our own sales teams with new organizations that they're going out to talk to new prospects. So our customers become advocates, one of the other kind of key tenets of customer success. I think the other key thing is that you've got to have within customer success a long-term focus. This isn't about short-term sales, short-term wins. We've got to think about the long-term success of our customers, the long-term renewal sales, long-term expansion sales, but don't think just over that short time horizon, how do I win this immediate deal? If I close this renewal, how is this going to help my customer achieve success in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? And it's really important to think about that longer time horizon. But I think you do, although we're saying focus on the long term, there are still needs when you've got to come in and help at the short term.
Yeah,
and I think you've got to think that, our sales team are often driven and they're kind of their focus is on the short term. But what they're trying to do is set the customer up for a long-term relationship. So although they're trying to win that initial deal, as part of those short-term objectives, what they also should be thinking is, how do I secure this customer so it's a long-term relationship for the business? So it's a different way of thinking about it. We're not changing what our objectives are, but just thinking about the different time horizons for the different two teams. And I think that is a really key thing to do. And some organizations doing it really well, but others struggling on it now.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I've had this conversation with clients and with other professionals saying, look, it's going to come as no surprise to your customer that you want them to renew and you want them to buy more, but no one's talking about it. It's like this elephant in the room. And just tell them right up from the very beginning, as you're talking about a success chain or something like that, the idea of, look, it's come as no surprise that we would love to have you as a customer for 20 years or more. And we know the only way that's going to happen is if you get so much value from us and you perceive the value that you're going to want to renew, and you're going to see so much value that you're going to want to get more. So let's just have a real honest discussion about what it takes for you to get that kind of value with our product or service in your organization. And let's work a plan together to make it happen. And that's, and then, pointing out to them that it is in the customer's own best interest for you to win new customers, for you to evolve your product in a way that will meet their future needs. So it's not like it's hurting them at all to give you reviews and to help give you that feedback. It's actually helping them, and it's in everyone's best interest. It's that whole mutual success.
It's a really interesting thing, because I think a lot of businesses don't have those conversations. You're saying to your customer, actually, I'm trying to, this is a long-term, people talk about partnerships, this is a long-term relationship where there's value for both of us on both sides, and we want this to succeed for everybody in the long term. And it is having those conversations up front. We're not just in this for a short-term sale.
Yeah.
And I think it also changes your customers' answers and responses you get back. You can talk about what are their goals over the next 12 months, but what are their goals longer term? What are they trying to achieve as a business? It really helps position us. I think a lot of what we've talked about is kind of changing the terminology and changing the kind of tone in those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, Jason, let me push kind of this last question back to you. And I think this one goes back to one of the last points we talked about as the kind of key things you need to look at here is incentives. So how would you look at kind of different ideas as to how you could structure incentives and compensation for both sales and customer success to try and drive that kind of commercial thinking within both organizations?
Yeah, this is such an emotion-rich topic for a lot of people. It's almost sort of the third rail that everyone is afraid to talk about and to step on, but you absolutely need to. And, for me, it's always, you've got to remember that people will not work against their own self-interest for long. They might take it on the chin in the short term for just a little bit as a show of faith and respect, but in the long term, they won't. So if you're not getting behaviors that you want, it means you've got the wrong incentives and motivations in place. People always, people are always getting rewarded for the behavior they're demonstrating. So if you're getting behavior you don't want, change the rewards. I think that really comes to play with commissions and incentives too, and needing to get sales to move just beyond revenue and rewarding sales and CS, from short term to really what is that longer place, and really also recognizing rewarding people for usage, for outcomes and renewals, and not just for closing deals. And I think it's important to have some degree of individual incentives, especially for sales folks who are motivated to go out and really drive those big deals and to win the business, because they still need to be doing that and they're working hard for that. But I think you need to also have shared incentives to keep everyone aligned, and possibly have individual team group incentives. And group incentives could include the entire organization. Include product development, include marketing, include finance, include others, to help everyone keep focused on this mutual success chain and mutual success loops going through there. And for example, I do know some companies are already out there shifting their sales compensation package to not just reward based on the revenue of the deal, but also contingent on the actual amount of consumption or usage of the product by the customer. And you've got a hosted solution, you've got usage data. What would it look like if you could get your salespeople to really focus on driving usage and driving success from the very beginning and give them a financial stake in the ground? That's a very different sales mentality where, oh, now I've set up for this long-term relationship and my interests are aligned with that. And I'd love to see a lot more organizations doing that. So for example, there also might have different stages where the customer is in a relationship and looking at how you adjust compensation based on that. So, you've got the sales closure and implementation and onboarding, adoption, expansion, sales and renewal sales, all that great stuff. Maybe the sales department is compensated on closures and renewals, and maybe success is compensated on expansions and renewals. There could be some overlapping incentives there. But I think it's also important that both sales and CS have weighted and commissions incentives based on actual customer usage and adoption. So even if you close a big deal with a customer, if their usage is low, the commission should be lowered for the entire organization so that everyone is focused on that. With the premise that usage and consumption is sort of a proxy for the customer is getting value from our product. They're using it regularly, they're paying attention, they're doing the things, because we know for a fact that if they're not using it, they're not getting value, but we assume that if they are using it, they're getting and perceiving the value. It makes it a lot easier to case. So focus that and weigh everyone on that. You might also weigh commissions based on the feedback and insights provided by the customer, the references, the social proof that we receive from customers. If the customer isn't invested enough in mutual success, in this mutual success loop, to provide the information you need to be relevant, to help you get new deals and to show that shows they're not invested in the relationship with you or your organization. So let's incentivize people for building those relationships in a way that is meaningful. And then I think, as we talked about, some company-wide incentives, based on adoption, feedback, references, and success, but make sure that all departments, especially those that don't normally have direct tie into the sales channels or the customer success sales channel or sales funnels, product, marketing, finance, others, reward them based on helping the customer achieve their outcomes and get them committed to long-term mutual success. So I think there's a lot of little things here that you can do that really can reinforce what are we looking at here. And I remember years ago, I was working for a large Fortune 500 company, and they had company-wide profit sharing plans. And initially it was just based on what was the profit of the company. And then they added sales growth and profit as well too. And it really did change people's mentality and where they were focused. I think if you want to have a company focused on customer success, if you want to have a company focused on long-term customer relationships and outcomes, you've got to think about how you incentivize and reward people for that. So just a couple of my thoughts. I don't know if you have other ideas around that.
I think you've covered off some really key things there. And I think it is, for me, I think it's looking at the two kind of commission plans and how do you bring them together on a commission incentive plans. And I think it is both sales and customer success are actually involved in many of the same parts of the customer life cycle. And I think what you've got to do, as you say, you've got to kind of actually weight it based on the contribution that the teams are making to those different parts of the sale or the customer's life cycle. So I think, a really key one to look at is renewal. And I don't think sales teams are rewarded necessarily the right way on renewals now. They should be there to set up that relationship so that you have a stronger chance and success rate of a renewal in future years and be rewarded for that. But I wouldn't want them to take a massive incentive as part of that. They should have some, but shift it. But you also want to kind of build out their incentive plan so that it isn't all upfront, that they are still incentivized for longer term behavior. Absolutely. And the same for customer success. There are contributions that customer success make to the initial sale, but not the massive contribution. So maybe you have a small weighting or something there. So I think you've got to look at that. That weighting is really the key thing. And I also think you've got to kind of look at, is it commission or is it a bonus type mechanism? And for me, I think sales commission works. This is how the sales industry works generally, and it's very successful. But I think for customer success, my own preference is a more bonus type objective. That is a team-based type objective, because I think that kind of else incentivizes the right behavior across the team, but you can still do it based on the same kind of targets that you're looking at across the life cycle of the customer. I just think you need a different sort of payment mechanism for the success teams, because I think the challenge with the sales and commissions approach is that commission feels like it's sales related, and I don't want to incentivize my success team around sales opportunities as such. I want to position it the right way, so it's about customer outcomes, it's about value, and if we achieve these objectives, there is then a weighted bonus. So it's just a very subtle change, but I think an important one.
And I think to that point too, you could put in additional bonuses or triggers for the length of your success chain.
Yep.
What's the average length that customer's been here? If they've been
Absolutely.
If our typical average is that customer stays for 5 years, great. If that's trending up, super.
Yep.
You know, I think there's a lot of stuff you could do.
Great. Well, that was the last question, guys. We really hope you've enjoyed this podcast. A really interesting one, because I think there are still a lot of debates and healthy discussions going on within the world of customer success as to what commercial means. And there are some organizations where things like renewals, things like expansion sit outside of customer success. You've got to find the right model that's right for your organization. But I think there's some really key points here that hopefully will give you kind of food for thought, and maybe drive some change for you and your organizations. The kind of bold question that we asked, so just a quick recap on this, having listened to the podcast, we'd love to hear back from you. What steps can you take now to define and implement a commercial customer success program in your own organization? So what changes can you put in place to make that commercial customer success program? That's it from us, guys. Thank you very much for joining us for another episode of the Jason's Take On podcast. As I said at the beginning, please do keep an eye out. We've got some really exciting guest ones coming up, and some great ones that we've planned ourselves. We do hope everyone is keeping well and safe in this strange new lockdown stay-at-home world. And we look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you from me, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.